Hello, 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 and welcome back to At the Helm with your host, Justin Helms. And I apologize. It has been about, I would say, at least a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks since I last made an episode. I won't lie, I was a sore loser. I was mad that my team went out there and did that against the team that they did, which I'll talk about that later, which is why I'm not giving any names right now. But I would like to welcome y'all back, of course. I'm going to be posting these in sections. This one's going to be about college football. Y'all know that's the thing I do the most really here. This one's going to be about college football. This is going to be my what did I learn or what did we learn after these past 2 weeks of college football. And then my reactions to the games that went on during those 2 weeks. So that is basically all this episode is going to be. The next one is going to be more rankings and then my picks for the games that are happening this weekend. And then I want to film an NFL episode later this week as well, but I will have to keep y'all updated. Stay tuned in for that. We'll see how that goes. And I know I'm so behind on Spotify and Apple Music, but it's because the way that I have to edit my videos for those, it takes longer because I have to really chop up the audios and everything like that. I have all except for one of the audio saves. So I'm going to be posting a burst of stuff on Spotify, Apple Music or Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, all those other platforms that Anchor puts them on and everything. I'm going to be putting a good burst of 4 or 5 episodes. So y'all can just listen to them straight and kind of progress through the season the way I did. I know I skipped this week, but you guys can come back and see why I skipped this week. But that's one thing I'm going to get better at, making sure that I can do it every single week. And then work has also been kicking up for me and everything like that. So that's another thing. But without further ado, I really want to just go ahead and get into the episode if my phone will stop glitching out. And here we go. Yeah. So the first thing I wanted to do is what did I learn? And we all know Alabama went out and lost to LSU. Same weekend, Georgia whooped up on Tennessee. Clemson lost to Notre Dame. Oregon lost this past Saturday. That was the week after everything else I just mentioned with LSU and Bama and Tennessee and Georgia and everything like that. But there's been a lot of things that have gone on. So what did I learn this week? I learned as of right now, and I will come out here and I will apologize to Chase, who was on the show, who tried to tell me. I'll apologize to Jonathan. I apologize to who else? Jackson Bramlett, Z Free, all the people that I've been on the podcast with the Sports Den podcast with Jonathan. I apologize to all of them. You were right. Georgia has created the new standard. And that is what I have learned. As of right now, UGA is the new standard. What little baby say? They took the drip from Atlanta and then run off? What? Or swag from Atlanta? Something like that. Kirby took the swag from Saban and ran off. And it's been a steady decline at Alabama since Kirby Smart left. Yes, there's been championships won in that era, but you can honestly see where the team has gotten worse and worse and worse until the point that it's at right now. And Georgia has gotten better and better and better until the point they're at right now. They're at a point where they literally go out there, they play their game, they force everybody else to play their game, and if you can't beat us at it, too bad. We're going to win another championship. So, and it reminds me so much of Alabama in those early 2010s, really throughout the whole 2010s in total, honestly. So that's what I learned that's one of the things I learned, that UGA is the new standard, and that hurts so hard for me to say, and there's a million other reasons of why they're the new standard of that we could go into, but you guys can go watch games. They don't need a quarterback. They don't need a star receiver. They have defense and they have a running game. The same thing Bama was built on for almost a decade and won championships with. And they have guys that can make big plays when big plays are needed, and they hold each other accountable. And there's a lot of other things I can go into, but I'll get into that rant later when I talk about my reaction for Bama. But that's the first thing I learned in college football this season so far, is that Georgia is the most dominant team. I remember one of my third or fourth episode, Georgia had struggled against Kent State and Missouri, and I came in here and I said, I don't think there's any team that's dominant over all other teams in college football. I think that's wrong now. Georgia is that team Ohio State is a close second, but I still don't see them quite being there. And so, yeah, that's really what I learned about Georgia. And then the second thing is that Clemson and Bama are no longer the teams to beat that they were in the late 2010s. I could have told you this about Clemson about 2 years ago or whenever Trevor Lawrence left. Since Trevor Lawrence left, you can see the decline in that team. Dabo Swinney, without a major top quarterback prospect, is not the same Dabo Swinney that we saw that was going back and forth with Bama every other year, winning championships. That defense isn't quite the same. Their running back, the talent that they recruit isn't quite the same. It's just the rest of the ACC, I won't say has caught up to them, but they have made it enough of a challenge that you can't just be like, oh, yeah, we're riding in Clemson for the playoff this year, like we were in years before. And the same thing with Bama. They're not so far ahead of everybody in the conference that you can just put them in as like, oh, yeah, Georgia, Bama, SEC championship. Like, we'll see what happens in the playoff. Like that, it doesn't work like that anymore. It's very sad, but it's possible that these teams could get back. But as of right now, they are no longer those teams to beat. Like, point blank, period. Alabama was in the championship last year, and yes, you can say it's premature, but right now, like, it's just there's been such a drop off in what we've seen from this team, even just from last year. But honestly, in the past 4 years, that it's become almost unrecognizable. So that's no longer a team to beat. And then the third thing that I learned is that Bo Nix is actually a solid quarterback. Like, I don't know what Bo Nix did out there. Dan Lanning got him moving different. I forget the offensive coordinator. I was just looking at it earlier. Let me see if I can pull this up right here. But Bo Nix is out there balling. He's been doing what he needed to do. He went over to the West Coast. I made fun of him a lot, even though they did lose to Washington, and that was partly Bo Nix's part. Kenny Dillingham. He's the offensive coordinator for Oregon over there. Dan Lanning, I think, mostly runs defensive stuff. So I think he's the one who's calling the plays, Dillingham, that is, and has gotten Bo Nix to play at the level that we have seen him at. And it reminds me a lot of how Jalen Hurts left Alabama and went to Oklahoma, and he became a starting caliber quarterback that you could even push as possibly being a playoff team. I don't think they made the playoffs with Jalen Hurts because they lost some games near the end of that season, if I remember correctly. But it was still a team that you could go out there and say that, okay, like this Oklahoma team is good enough to challenge teams beyond their conference that are considered the cream of the crop, that are considered at the top. Oregon is one of those teams, even though they lost to Washington. Washington's a really good offensive team, too. I think they finally found a team that could match their production offensively wise. And then Washington had a good defensive scheme to throw Bo Nix in that offense off. So I have to give my credit to Bo Nix. He has gotten better. Is he worthy of being even a third round pick in the draft? No, not in my opinion. I don't think anyone should be taking him beyond the fourth round, like or not beyond, in before the fourth round. Like, there's no one that should be drafting him at that point, unless you're just very, very thirsty for a quarterback, or something happens between now and then that just like changes everyone's opinion, which we see it happen all the time in the draft. They go to the combine, they go to Senior Bowl, and all of a sudden they're a top pick. Like, there's a lot of crazy stuff. But yeah, I have to give credit to Bo Nix. Like, he went out there, he did what he was supposed to do. I can pull up his stats for this season so we can kind of get a picture of what exactly I'm talking about here. And I made fun of Bo Nix mostly because Georgia fans kept trying to sell Oregon as a top 10 team they've beat. Georgia, I give them their credit now. Like, y'all just heard me. So I still don't think that Oregon is considered a top 10 team that Georgia has beat, but Georgia has proved themselves beyond that, and Bo Nix has proved that they aren't just a scrub that Georgia ran through. You know what I'm saying? So 24 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, 89 QBR rating, which is third in college football right now, 2,775 yards, so just under 2,800 right now. And he's completing 73% of his passes. Against Washington, he didn't even play bad. It was not numbers-wise, 19 for 27, 70% completing, 2 touchdowns, 280 yards. It just wasn't honestly enough. It was an offensive game, 37-34, and they ended up taking it out in the last little bit. So I'll talk about that later, or actually in just a second because I'm going to roll straight into these reactions. I'm keeping this episode kind of short because I realize a lot of my episodes are very, very long. And then there's honestly just not as much to talk about anymore unless y'all want to hear me rant about Bama and go super, super in depth. But I'm not going to do that. So, or am I? I might do that. But, okay, going into reactions over the past 2 weeks, I'm going to start with Georgia versus Tennessee. Oh, my God. That Georgia team and that Georgia defense went out there and made Hendon Hooker, Jabari Small, Josh Heupel, Alex Gollash, they made all of them look so, so silly. From the moment they stepped on the field to the moment they got off, Georgia was pressuring the quarterback, forcing Hendon Hooker to throw bad throws, to get off of his spot, to get him uncomfortable. They were forcing him to use receivers past Hyatt. Hyatt was taken almost completely out of the game. We saw a lot of Brew McCoy. We saw a lot of Cedric Tillman, these guys. And then their running game was just non-existent. There wasn't much that Tennessee could get going. Like, it was truly a defensive performance for Georgia to go out there and do what they did. It was 27-13 victory. Those points mostly came near the end of the game. Tennessee had their first touchdown with 2 minutes left. Or no, about 6 minutes left in the fourth. Yeah, so that's crazy. Just looking at this right now. But yeah, I can read you like right here. Georgia fumbled. Tennessee had a field goal. Then Tennessee, this is their like the results of their drives. Punt, field goal, interception, punt, fumble, downs, touchdown, downs. What? Like there's only out of all the possessions they had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 possessions. Only 3 of them ended in scores, and then 2 of them ended in turnovers. Really 4 if you want to look at it when they got turnover on downs as well. So Georgia went out there. They put together a defensive masterclass, the exact things that we said that Georgia needed to do, they did. They blitzed and they pass rushed Hendon Hooker. They made sure that Hyatt stayed out of the game offensively. Hyatt had 6 catches for 63 yards, which isn't terrible, but it's not good enough to beat a team like Georgia that isn't bad offensively. They can get things going offensively if they need to. Stetson Bennett is a little bit a step above a game manager, in my opinion, and he can make off-schedule plays and do things like that. I would love to Georgia fans overhype him a little bit to me. I still think Stetson Bennett has his flaws, as I think would most logical Georgia fans, they would tell you he does. I would love to see where Georgia fans rank Stetson Bennett amongst Georgia quarterbacks like Aaron Murray and Matt Stafford. Is he above them because he won a championship? Is he above Aaron Murray? I think that would be the most interesting one. Matt Stafford is hard to say because of what he's been able to do in the NFL. But in terms of their college careers, like they've both put up some pretty good numbers. I know the game has changed a lot to the point where a guy like Stetson Bennett can't go out there and pass and all this stuff. But that's off topic. But overall, Georgia's gone out there and they've just been dominant on dominant. They whooped Mississippi State. I'm not very surprised about that. Mississippi State has no defense. Alabama whooped them, and we've seen what Alabama has looked like over the past couple of weeks, so we know what Mississippi State is. And then, yeah, that's really my reaction to that Georgia-Tennessee game. A great game by Stetson Bennett. He went out there, 2 touchdowns, 17 for 25, 257 yards. Georgia even had their rushing game going, and Kenny McIntosh was out there running the ball, hard-fought yards. Everything that Georgia did was exactly what they needed. They did the correct things. They knew that Brock Bowers would most likely be taken out the game, so they drew up plays to exploit matchups for Ladd McConkey against the soft defensive backs of Tennessee. And Tennessee didn't help themselves either. They had a lot of penalties and mental mistakes and stupid stuff that I won't say cost them the game, but it sure didn't help them. They had 9 penalties for 55 yards. So, yeah, that's my reaction for Georgia-Tennessee. There's not much to say, honestly. If you go back and watch that tape, they just outright beat them. Like it looked like Tennessee of old and Georgia of old. It looked like a game that you would have seen 2-3 years ago between Georgia and Tennessee. It just looked like they went out there and they did what they were supposed to do. My next game I wanted to talk about, or the next team I wanted to talk about, is Alabama. I really, really didn't want to talk about this team, but this is honestly the absolute worst team I have seen from Alabama in my time watching them, honestly, because when I started watching Alabama, Nick Saban got to Alabama in 2007. I was 7 years old. Or 8. I don't really remember watching football much before that. Like, I remember it being on and I was there, but was I really paying attention and comprehending what was going on? Not really. Since I've been watching Alabama, like in my time or even a little bit before, like I barely remember guys like John Parker Wilson and stuff like that. Since my time, Alabama has been the powerhouse, and it has been unquestioned that Alabama could win out and do this and do that. And there's only been really 1 year where Alabama has lost 2 games and looked like this. And I would say that was really maybe 2 years. You could say 2014, the year that we went to the Sugar Bowl with Derrick Henry, where Derrick Henry's like freshman year. And then the year that we lost Cam Newton year, 2010, when Cam came in and beat us in the Iron Bowl. And we had lost 2 games that season, I think. I think it was like Julio's last year or something like that too. So, actually, no, maybe it's second to last. No, Julio actually might have been gone already. I don't know. It was in 2010 though. But this team is just by far even worse than that team. Like, there is no type of rhythm to how the offense goes. There's no rhyme or reason for the plays that are being called and why they're called in the situations they are called on offense and the defensive side. There's no utilizing of our best parts of our offense, of our weapons that are better than the guys that are on the field. There's no utilizing of the young guys who have showed out continuously every time they get an opportunity to touch the green. They have showed that they have been better than the guys that are on the field that are going to graduate and be drafted. They have done this time and time and time again, and it starts from the top down. This team has no accountability. This team has no discipline. This team lacks offensive firepower. This team lacks passion. This team lacks a whole list of things that I could go into and talk over and over and over about. But the most disappointing thing is the lack of accountability. Saban finally took accountability, but nothing changed. He came in there. He said, hey, this is my fault. We shouldn't have lost these games, whatever. I didn't prepare the team. At the end of the day, it's on me. But after that, it just seems so nonchalant of, well, we put the guys in the system and they do this and we try our best and blah, 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 blah. Like, I don't care. Go out there and try something different. If you see what you're doing right now isn't working, why has nothing changed? Alabama came out of a bye week, and played LSU the same exact way that any other team would have. They played LSU exactly how they played that Tennessee game, exactly how they played that A&M game, exactly how they played that Texas game. There's no adjustments. There's nothing that changes. I don't think Bill O'Brien watches film. I don't think Pete Golding truly watches film in depth enough to actually change anything. It's just so frustrating to see the same team make the same mistakes every single week and then make these close games and then lose because of it too. It's so sorry. And it's honestly one of the worst performances I've ever seen by Saban. It honestly makes me scared that Saban has gone soft. He's gone soft. Like, it's just, he has no fire to him to get anyone hyped up about the team anymore. Right now, what is going on at Alabama, it is being deconstructed due to the coordinators that are on the team and due to the lack of accountability and passion for the sport of football and the fact that they're being played. The fact that these players and coaches are at Alabama, the powerhouse that has been on and off since literally Bear Bryant in the 60s, almost 70, 80 years ago now. Like, it's so sad. It's so sad to see. But to kind of bring that to a wrap, like I said, this team no longer plays a brand of football that forces everyone to adjust what they do to find a way to win. Now this team plays a brand of football that is is soft enough that other teams can come in and impose their will and force Bama to make the adjustments. That did not used to be the case in the past. Coordinators have to absolutely go. Bill O'Brien is number one. He cannot stay on this team. He was a terrible hire from the start. Saban heard from it from the minute that he hired Bill O'Brien. And you can go down the list of coordinators. And I was talking with my father this morning about this. You can go down the list of coordinators that Saban has had at Alabama offensively and defensively. And he's been known as the coach that will come in and rehab these coordinators and send them off to better situations and have them coaching well. You can look at guys like Cristobal. He's over there in Miami. He's trying to get it together. He's not fully there, but he has time to get that together. They haven't looked absolutely as bad as they could have been. Kirby Smart is over there. Lane Kiffin, Mike Locksley. There's just coaches on coaches on coaches that have gone out and gotten jobs out of being Jimbo Fisher, out of the Alabama coaching tree. And you look at all these guys, and the one thing you say that they have in common is, yes, they got fired for their previous situation, but the other thing you can say they have in common is that they can still coach. There is something at least in them that you could see from the situation they got fired from that, okay, they have this part and these good parts that maybe Bama needs. Let's take that. That's exactly what they did with a guy like Kiffin. Kiffin had issues with USC. Kiffin had issues at Tennessee just because he's too outgoing, his personality, and then off the field issues and everything like that. The problem with Alabama at the time, we didn't have a lot of offense. Teams' offenses were evolving and getting better. And so what did Saban do? He went and found a coordinator that could bring that offense to Alabama and match the defense that they had so that they could continue to win games. Bill O'Brien doesn't bring anything extra to Bama. He does not add anything extra to Bama. Bill O'Brien is there literally for the sole reason of Saban wanted him there because he's coached NFL. He wanted these guys to be developed by an NFL coach, and he thought that Bill O'Brien would be the answer to be able to rehab an NFL coach and send him back. Like, I really think he was trying to do it to prove a point, and right now he just gets more stubborn and more stubborn. The more he is told that the hire is wrong, the more he doubles down on these players need to fit the system, something. No, you build your system around players. You don't put players into a system. You find what your players can do, and you make the best team out of it because that is what you have. And if you can't do anything out of that, you get fired. So that's why Bill O'Brien has to go to me. Like I said, you can look down the list of coordinators that Alabama has had and said, even though all these guys had off the field issues or they had this problem or they got fired for this or that, you could still look at them and said, well, they got fired because of these off the field issues. Their coaching was great, though. Their coaching was fine. They weren't out there just losing games. They got fired because of this, and this. It's not that they were just the worst coach in the world. It's they had offense, but they didn't have defense. They had defense, but they didn't have offense. Bill O'Brien had nothing. Go look at those Texans seasons, those last few seasons he was over there. Not only was there problems in the locker room, that team was terrible. Bill O'Brien was the GM and the coach, and he had no idea what he was doing. I don't think he actually watches film on anything. I think he picks things off of name, and he just hopes that he can make stuff happen with big plays and explosiveness and all this other stuff. And that's why I think you saw so many off-schedule plays with Deshaun Watson and DeAndre Hopkins and the Texans, because they didn't have any real plays. So I think this is the last straw for me with Bill O'Brien and Alabama. I watched all of the LSU game. I saw what happened. It didn't take anything special. The offense was stagnant most of that game. They were able to get things going at times, but nothing was consistent. None of the players were consistent except for maybe Jahmyr Gibbs. Bryce Young threw an interception. There was almost 100 yards of penalties. Like, it was the same exact thing we've seen all season long. And that's the thing that frustrates me the most, is that nothing has changed, which means no one's being held accountable. It's monotonous. It's annoying. It's tiresome. It got to the point that last week or this Saturday, I was out, so I didn't get to see the full Ole Miss game. But I go back and watch my games. I watched a quarter and a half of that game, and I turned it off. What is there to watch? What am I going to see that's different than anything that I've seen against the A&M game and the Texas game? There's nothing different. I'm watching the same exact team over and over do the same exact stupid stuff and the same exact mistakes that puts them in positions where almost every game is one score. Every game is one score. And I'm not willing to say that the Alabama dynasty is over yet, but I will say right now, Bill O'Brien is trying his hardest to tear it apart. And I can't sit here and say that Saban isn't a part of it, because right now he isn't stopping it. If you're not part of the problem, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. That's what my high school coach used to always say. And I ask my friends that usually as a joke all the time: are you part of the solution? Are you part of the problem? And there's only two choices. You can't be neutral. You're either part of the problem or you're part of the solution. And right now, there's not a single person on that roster, coaches, players, anybody that is part of the solution. I mean, Jahmyr Gibbs. That's the only one I can name. Even Bryce Young has struggled at times. Will Anderson's been taken out of games. Like, it's just, there's no one that's been part of the solution consistently this season. So that's all I have to say about Alabama. I don't really have reactions to the game because, once again, like, it's nothing to see. There's nothing special. These teams aren't doing anything crazy to beat Alabama. They're just going in there, playing their game, and beating Alabama because that's all it takes now. I remember the days where people used to say you had to have everything go right. You had to do everything perfectly and then have some luck. And it was true. It was true. We saw a lot of fluke plays that beat Bama in the years that they were losing in those years. Now it doesn't take that. You can go in there and just beat them straight up. It's too easy. But moving on to the rest of my reactions, Oregon lost to Washington. I won't say I'm surprised, but I did have Oregon in my top 4 after Alabama and Clemson had lost. And 1 second. Ooh, that whole rant had my mouth so dry. Oh boy. But Oregon and Washington, I won't say that I expected Oregon to go in and just like beat down on Washington, but I didn't expect Washington to lay down for Oregon either. Like, I didn't expect Washington to come in there and win. And Washington did go into that game 7-2. And now they have the same record as Oregon. Washington has been a good team all season long. Michael Penix Jr. goes out there. He does what he needs to do. We've seen him be shaky at times, but he has even looked like a Heisman candidate at times. And I gave Bo Nix his credit and everything like that. But they just, that defense over there at Oregon could not stop anything. 122 yards to McMillan. Jalen McMillan, the receiver for Washington, 70 yards to, I'm going to try to say this best I can, Taulapapa. I'm going to just call him Wayne. Wayne T. That's their running back. 70 yards and a touchdown, and then a touchdown to their other running back in Cameron Davis. So it wasn't like Oregon did anything quite special either. They just went out there and they played a good defense and they played a tough fought game, and they went out there and beat Bo Nix 19 for 27. Bo Nix, his completion percentage wasn't as good as it has been in games previous. Also, Oregon did lose a fumble. But all in all, Washington went out. They won that game. And all this really means is that Oregon is once again out of it, and the whole entire Pac-12 is out of the conversation. I had said at the beginning of the season that I knew that the Big 12 was out of the conversation as soon as Oklahoma lost. That's no longer the case because of what TCU is doing. It's Pac-12 is out of the equation because of the losses of USC, UCLA, and Oregon. They've all beat each other up to the point that none of them are going to make it, and the committee's not going to look at any of those 2-loss teams, especially with the schedules that they play, and put them in there. I don't think they're going to look at a 2-loss team in general to put them in the top 4, but we see what this looks like now with Oregon and Washington. So that's my honest reaction to that game, is that it just means that the Pac-12 is truly out of it. We'll see what Oregon can do for the rest of the season, but a great start to Dan Lanning's tenure at Oregon. We'll see how much further he can go. He's got that defense playing a lot better. He was able to bring Bo Nix to what he is now, him and Dillingham over there. So I give them credit for that. Round of applause for them. And lastly, the last thing I wanted to touch on, which I guess is just a small thing, is just Kentucky fell off so bad. I thought Kentucky was going to be a solid team that was going to challenge Georgia this season. I thought it was going to be Kentucky in Tennessee that challenged Georgia this season. We saw Kentucky get beat by Tennessee. We saw them go out there and lose to South Carolina with Spencer Rattler of all teams, which is absolutely mind-blowing. And then we saw a guy in Will Levis who started off this year as one of the top quarterback prospects turn into what he has. In the past 5 games, Will Levis has 6 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, 165 yards per game, which is not good in college football. If you're not throwing at least 200, 250 yards a game, you're not a top quarterback in college football. You can't be, because the way the game is played now, it's not so easy to just throw around the yard, but it's way easier than it was before, and you should be at least touching that 200 yards a game status in most of these games. And then 6 touchdowns, only 1 more touchdown than you have interceptions in the past 5 games, 64 completion percentage, and then just go down the list. They lost to Ole Miss, 3-point game. They lost by 10 to South Carolina. They didn't have Will Levis. I gave them kind of the benefit of the doubt in that one because of his injury. Kentucky beat Mississippi State, not a super surprise, got whooped against Tennessee. 3 picks for Will Levis, and he didn't even touch 100 yards passing in that game. Barely slid out of Missouri, and then this past weekend, which was the icing on the cake, they went out there and they lost to Vanderbilt. And they lost to Vanderbilt. Kentucky, Will Levis, 11 for 23, so under 50% completion, and then an interception, and then just barely over 100 yards with 109. So that team and Will Levis has been completely written off. Kentucky, once again, is a basketball school. And we knew this. And I came on here and I tried to give them the benefit of the doubt and said, Kentucky's no longer just a basketball school. You have to give them their respect. But they honestly took a step back from what they've been doing the previous 2-3 years, where they only lost 2-3 games and made, I think they made a New Year's Six. No, they didn't make a New Year's Six. I'd have to go back and look. But they made some pretty solid bowl games over the past few years, which not sure what exactly a bowl game means to teams like that. As an Alabama fan, I can tell you, in my opinion, bowl games mean absolutely nothing. You get a trophy and a t-shirt, and those players go on to play in the NFL, and they don't care anymore. So, yeah, Kentucky fell off. Will Levis fell off. Sad to see. I'm trying to think of what other reactions I can do. That's all I had on this list. So, yeah, I guess we'll close with that for the beginning of this show. It's a good length. 32 minutes. Thank y'all for tuning in on the first part of this episode. I'm about to film the second part of this episode. Is going to be the rankings, and then I have to choose what I'm going to do for my game picks. I'm thinking that one will be a little bit shorter, a little bit faster. It's not a lot that you can break down into. One of these days, I'm going to make a full itinerary of my Alabama stuff and post it for my Alabama fans and for them to understand what exactly are the issues with this team and what needs to be done to correct it, and who are some of the coordinators that could be on the way in the door if Bill O'Brien and Pete Golding are fired, or who are the guys that should be hired and stuff like that. Coaching carousel, of course, that's going to be going on. I'm going to make sure I make a segment about that in one of my future episodes. And, of course, the Heisman Watch, with so much going on, and Hendon Hooker losing Bryce Young out of it. C.J. Stroud is there. Stetson Bennett is playing well. Where is Bo Nix? There's so much going on. I'm going to make a Heisman Watch segment in one of my later episodes, maybe later this week, maybe even next week after these weekend's games. But as of right now, that's it for this episode. Well, that's it for this first part of the episode. I'll see y'all right back on rankings and game picks in just a second. Deuce.